how to quietly make the avoidance anxious to reconnect. You know what's fascinating? The people who pull away are often the ones who crave connection the most. They just don't know how to handle it. Avoidants aren't cold, they're scared. They fear being engulfed. They want intimacy, but only if they feel totally safe. So what happens when you chase them? You confirm their fear. This person's going to take over my life. Here's where most people get it wrong. They try harder, more texts, more calls, more talks. But the real shift happens not when you chase them, but when you quietly return to yourself. You don't need to slam doors, go no contact in a dramatic rage, or play games. You simply become undeniably magnetic again, but not for them. For yourself, for your life. You start living in a way that signals, I've remembered who I am. And when you do that, when you stop fighting for their attention and start cultivating your value again, you create the one thing avoidants can't resist, curiosity. They start wondering, why are you okay without me? And not in a manipulative way, but in a way that makes them feel your absence and question their decision. So if you want them to reconnect, don't argue your worth. Show it quietly, elegantly, powerfully. Avoidant individuals are often misunderstood. To the person on the receiving end, their behavior can seem cold, distant, or even indifferent. But what's important to understand is that avoidants aren't typically reacting to you. They're reacting to their own internal discomfort with intimacy. They have a deep-seated fear of emotional engulfment, of losing their independence, or of being overwhelmed by someone else's emotional needs. That fear can lead them to distance themselves, pull away when things start to feel close, or become emotionally unavailable when real connection begins to form. This is where many people get confused and hurt. You might think, if we were getting along so well, why did they suddenly go cold? Or, why does it seem like they're punishing me for getting closer to them? The answer lies in how avoidants process emotional closeness. While secure individuals thrive on connection and see closeness as safe and fulfilling, avoidants often interpret the same closeness as risky or threatening to their sense of autonomy. The closer you get, the more exposed they feel. They start to believe that intimacy will require them to sacrifice parts of themselves, or that they will be responsible for someone else's emotional state, which to them can feel suffocating. What's even more frustrating is that many avoidant people do, in fact, crave connection. They just want it on their terms, when it feels emotionally safe and without pressure. This creates a confusing dynamic. They move toward intimacy, then suddenly retreat the moment vulnerability surfaces. It feels like a push-pull pattern. For the person on the other side, it can feel like emotional whiplash, like you're being punished for getting too close, even though that connection was exactly what you both seem to want. When this happens, it's easy to take it personally. You may feel like you did something wrong, or that you weren't enough to make them stay. But it's not about your worth. It's about their emotional wiring. Avoidants are often responding to deeply ingrained patterns from past experiences, sometimes from childhood, where closeness may have felt conditional, unsafe, or overwhelming. These patterns taught them to guard their independence fiercely, to stay in control of their emotions by keeping others at a distance. Understanding this doesn't mean you should tolerate being treated poorly, but it does help you stop blaming yourself for their discomfort. It allows you to step out of the cycle over-explaining, over-giving, or over-analyzing what went wrong. Once you realize that their withdrawal isn't necessarily a reflection of your actions, but a response to their internal fear of closeness, you can approach the situation with more clarity and less self-blame. And from that space, you can decide how you want to respond, not from a place of desperation, but from a place of power, peace, and self-respect. When someone you care about starts pulling away, the natural instinct is to reach out and try to bring them back. You might send more messages, ask if they're okay, suggest meeting up, or try to clarify what went wrong. These actions usually come from a genuine place of care and a desire to maintain the connection. But when you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, this increased effort can actually have the opposite effect. It confirms their fear that getting close to someone will cost them their freedom. Avoidants operate with a strong internal narrative around autonomy. Their identity and emotional safety are often wrapped up in the ability to maintain independence and emotional distance. So, when a relationship starts to deepen and expectations of closeness grow, they can begin to feel internally threatened. It's not always conscious, but there's an emotional reflex that kicks in, a kind of, I need to get space now before I lose myself. So they retreat. When you respond to that retreat by leaning in, what you're actually doing, without realizing it, is intensifying the pressure they already feel. Imagine someone already pulling away, and now someone else is following them, trying to close that gap. The avoidant perceives this as being cornered, even if your actions are kind and well-meaning. The more you chase, the more they feel the need to escape. Not because they don't care, because their nervous system interprets pursuit as a threat to their self-sovereignty. This doesn't mean you should play games or become emotionally unavailable yourself. It just means that direct pursuit, especially when driven by anxiety, fear of abandonment, or a desire for immediate clarity, tends to backfire. It keeps you in a dynamic where you're always reacting to their withdrawal rather than setting the tone for the relationship yourself. The more effort you put in during this phase, the more they feel the need to maintain emotional distance to protect themselves. Avoidants aren't soothed by extra attention when they're triggered, they're soothed by space. But that space needs to be emotionally neutral, not laced with resentment or manipulation. What often works best is doing less, not more. That doesn't mean you vanish or punish them. It just means you stop chasing. You give them the space they think they need. But more importantly, you use that space to ground yourself. There's something powerful in letting energy balance shift. When you stop reaching out constantly and start focusing on your own center, this isn't about the dynamic changes. Instead of confirming their fear that being close to someone means pressure and responsibility, you show them something they rarely experience, someone who values connection but doesn't need them to feel whole. That's the quiet confidence avoidants are rarely exposed to. And ironically, this isn't about you not. It's that calm, grounded detachment that starts to make them question the distance they've created. When someone you care about becomes distant, it can feel incredibly destabilizing. You may feel an urgent need to fix things, to talk it out, or to somehow pull them back in. But the truth is, the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is to stop trying to control their behavior and start reconnecting with yourself. This is the shift that changes everything, not because it's a tactic, but because it's the only place where your power actually lies. When you're emotionally invested in someone who pulls away, it's easy to lose touch with your own center. You begin to focus so much on what they are thinking, how they are feeling, and what they might do next, that you stop paying attention to your own emotional needs. Your sense of worth becomes tangled in their validation. And without realizing it, you start to orbit around them, waiting for a sign that you still matter. This is dangerous ground, not just because it gives them control, but because it disconnects you from your greatest source of influencing your sense of self. The most attractive and magnetic people are not those who chase or beg or prove. They're the ones who are deeply rooted in their own value, who know who they are, and who refuse to let someone else's uncertainty shake their foundation. And when you're dealing with someone avoidant, that kind of self-connection is even more important. Avoidants respond not to pressure, but to presence. When you pull back, not to punish, but to realign, you shift the energy entirely. Instead of continuing the cycle over functioning in the relationship, you start nurturing your own life. That might look like spending more time with friends, diving into a personal project, prioritizing your physical or mental health, or simply allowing yourself to be still without obsessing over the connection. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about remembering that you were whole before this person entered your life, and you remain whole even in their absence. When you reconnect with that truth, everything changes. This isn't about you become less reactive, less anxious, and more intentional. And that calm, grounded energy isn't just powerful, it's magnetic. Ironically, the moment you stop fighting to be seen by someone else is often the moment they start to notice your presence again. When you return to yourself, you create a quiet contrast to the emotional intensity they might be used to. They're not used to someone who can love them without losing themselves. That difference stands out, and it draws attention. Not because you chased it, but because you stopped needing it to feel okay. The goal isn't to manipulate or make them come back. The goal is to get back to you, to the version of you who doesn't abandon yourself just because someone else pulled away. That's where your strength is. That's where your peace is. And that's the space from which healthy love can actually return, if it's meant to. Magnetism isn't about noise, drama, or trying harder to be seen. Real magnetism is quiet. It's the kind that makes people lean in, not because you demanded their attention, but because your energy speaks for itself. When someone pulls away, especially an avoidant, the instinct is often to turn up the volume. You try to be more expressive, more available, more giving. You think that if you can just show them how much you care, they'll come back. But the truth is, this kind of over-efforting actually makes you appear less secure, less grounded, and less magnetic. People are drawn to those who are emotionally centered. The person who knows their value doesn't need to prove it. They don't need to explain it in long texts or plead for clarity. Their actions, their energy, and their presence all communicate one thing: I know who I am. And I don't need to be chosen to believe it. This is especially important when dealing with someone with avoidant tendencies. The more you try to force connection with an avoidant, the more they feel the need to create distance. But when you step back, not in anger, but in quiet self-assurance, you introduce a new energy into the dynamic. You're no longer trying to convince them of your worth. You're simply embodying it. This isn't about playing hard to get. It's not about pretending you don't care or acting aloof. It's about genuinely reconnecting with your own life force. When you do that, when you start living fully again, with or without their attention, they feel the shift. Maybe not right away, and maybe not consciously, but the energy doesn't lie. You become someone who is not chasing but choosing, someone who is not performing but simply being. That's rare, and rare is magnetic. What happens in that space is subtle but powerful. The avoidant begins to feel your absence, not just physically, but energetically. They notice that the dynamic has changed. The pressure is gone. There's no longer someone trying to pull them closer. And in that stillness, something else starts to grow: curiosity. They wonder what's changed. Why are you okay without them? Why aren't you trying to fix it? That curiosity creates a tension they didn't expect, the kind that makes them think, reflect, and question the distance they created. It's important to understand that you're not doing this to get a specific outcome. You're not trying to manipulate their emotions. You're just choosing a different focus, one that places your peace, your confidence, and your self-respect above the need to be understood or validated by someone else. This is where your quiet power lies. In the calm refusal to abandon yourself for anyone, in the ability to hold your value without needing applause, and in the simple act of living your life in a way that says, I am enough, whether you choose me or not. That's the kind of energy that lingers. That's the energy they remember. Curiosity is a far more powerful force than pressure, especially when you're dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies. Pressure tends to make avoidants retreat even further. It activates their core fear. That emotional closeness means losing control or being overwhelmed. The more you try to talk them into reconnecting, to seek closure, or to push for emotional intimacy, the more they associate the relationship with stress. But curiosity, that does something entirely different. It draws them in without making them feel trapped. It gives them space while planting a seed in their mind that they can't quite shake. Why aren't you chasing me anymore? When you stop initiating, stop explaining, and stop performing for their affection, you create a kind of stillness in the dynamic. And in that stillness, this isn't about you're no longer feeding the familiar narrative they've grown used to, where they are the one in control, the one with the power to give or withhold connection. By no longer playing your part in that script, you disrupt the pattern, not loudly, not with ultimatums, but with calm detachment and the quiet power of emotional independence. This shift doesn't happen through silence alone. It happens through how you carry yourself during that silence. Avoidants aren't just drawn back by absence. They're drawn back by transformation. When they look at your life from a distance and see that you haven't fallen apart without them, that you're thriving, growing, and moving forward, it unsettles their expectations. You were supposed to need them more. Instead, you've become even more grounded, even more magnetic. That's when curiosity kicks in. They start to wonder if they missed you, if maybe they walked away from something or someone they didn't fully understand. Your calmness is unexpected. Your confidence is intriguing. You're not angry. You're not begging. You're just fine. That kind of self-possession is rare. And it forces them to reconsider what they thought they knew about the relationship and about you. The part is, this approach doesn't require manipulation. You're not playing games. You're simply stepping back into your power. You're letting go of the need to control their behavior or dictate the outcome. And in doing so, you become unpredictable in the most beautiful way. Avoidants expect neediness. They expect pressure. When they don't get it, they're left with questions. And questions lead to re-engagement, not always immediately, and not always with a declaration of love, but with a kind of mental and emotional return that pressure could never have achieved. This is how you shift the dynamic. Not through force, but through emotional sovereignty. You allow them the space they crave, while embodying the strength and stability they didn't realize they were drawn to. You become the question they didn't they'd be asking. Not, why did you chase me? But, why did you stop? And more importantly, why does that bother me? That is where reconnection begins, not from trying harder, but from becoming someone worth missing. Thank you for being here, for listening, and more importantly, for doing the work to come home to yourself. I hope you carry this with you. You are not meant to chase love. You are meant to become it. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and never forget your power. Thank you and goodbye.